The night manager at my own hotel burned my late wife's photo and called me a junkie while pouring my heart medication down the storm drain just because I looked homeless after the airline lost my luggage. Then she kicked me in the ribs and dumped mop water on me before realizing I was actually Nolan Bryce, the billionaire who owned the entire hotel chain and had been quietly monitoring how staff treated vulnerable guests for 3 years. After checking on my sister hotels across 3 continents for 7 straight days, I stumbled into my own hotel in Chicago, desperate for rest. Between the exhaustion and the donated clothes I'd been wearing since the airline mishap, I looked completely down and out. That's all the night manager, Kendra, needed to decide I was going to be her entertainment for the evening. She barely looked up from her computer before speaking in that indifferent tone hotel staff use when they're already itching to get rid of you. "Can I help you?" she asked, flat and dismissive. When I said I needed a room, she actually laughed in my face and exchanged a look with the security guard, Marcus. My face burned as they started talking about me like I wasn't standing right there. Kendra turned to Marcus and asked whether they should call the cops or give me a chance to leave first, clearly enjoying herself far too much. The disgust in their eyes made my stomach twist. I stood there, too tired to care anymore, while Marcus walked around the desk until he was standing inches from me. I could smell his cologne mixing with stale coffee on his breath. He sniffed, theatrically, then gagged. Oh man, he reeks like piss and rock bottom. Before I even had time to react, he grabbed me by the collar and shoved me hard. I stumbled, and Kendra let out a delighted laugh from behind the desk. "Careful, you might catch something." Pain shot through my back, an old injury flaring up, and I couldn't suppress the gasp. Kendra clapped her hands together in mock alarm. "Oh my God, the withdrawal shakes are starting," she cackled. Marcus added, "Classic junkie performance, seen it 100 times." They both did this ridiculous trembling act to mimic me. When I reached for a chair to steady myself, Marcus kicked it away, the metal legs screeching against the marble floor. That's when they noticed my ring finger. Kendra's eyes narrowed as she pointed to the tan line. "Let me guess, your wife left you because you're a pathetic drunk." Marcus piled on, "Probably used to smack her around with those twitchy hands. No wonder she ran. Who could love a mess like this?" My chest constricted. My wife had died last year, and somehow they'd struck the one nerve that still bled. They must have seen something shift in my expression because both of them stepped closer. I was still struggling to catch my breath when my wallet slipped from my pocket and scattered across the floor. Marcus stomped on my driver's license, grinding it under his boot. Kendra had already scooped up the photo of my wife. She held it up for Marcus to see, and I lunged forward instinctively, heart pounding. She yanked it back, smirking. "Please, this woman's way out of your league." "That's my wife," I said, barely above a whisper. Kendra just smiled wider and tore the photo clean in half. The sound of the rip hit me like a slap. Those torn pieces were all I had left of her. I reached again, desperate, but she already had her lighter out. One flick, and the flame consumed the image while Marcus held my head down, forcing me to watch. Ashes floated up into my face as she said, "She's gone. Just like your dignity." I tried to pull away, but Marcus pushed harder on my neck. Something popped in my ribs, and I cried out from the pain. They finally released me, and I collapsed to my knees, gasping, reaching for my prescription bottle. Kendra spotted it first. She snatched it up. "Oxy, of course," she sneered. "Junkie trash." I tried to stand, but the pain made it impossible. She strutted over to the door. "Those are prescribed," I managed to say. "I need those." She just laughed and dumped every last pill down the storm drain while I watched, powerless. "Can't sell these to kids now, can you?" By then, Kendra was already on the phone with 911, breathlessly describing a violent vagrant who had threatened their lives. Every word she gave was a lie. While she talked, Marcus shredded my boarding passes and tore apart the merger documents I'd been reviewing. "Look at this garbage, pretending he's someone important." But the worst part, what truly made my blood run cold, was when Marcus found my hotel loyalty card. My name was printed right there. He laughed and showed Kendra. "Nolan Bryce. This loser thinks he owns the place." They both burst out laughing as Marcus snapped the loyalty card in half. Kendra leaned in close, her breath hot against my ear. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." Then came the final assault. Marcus grabbed me by the hair and dragged me outside, throwing me onto the cold, wet concrete. Kendra followed with a mop bucket and dumped the filthy water over me. "Maybe now you'll smell better." Marcus slammed his boot into my ribs while I was still down. "Come back, and I'll put you in the hospital." Kendra actually spit on me before adding, "or the morgue."
They walked back inside, laughing and high-fiving through the glass, while I lay there, struggling to understand how this could happen, at my own hotel. Blood pooled on the concrete, mixing with the mop water, while their silhouettes moved behind the lobby window, still joking about homeless people. I didn't move until Liam from the morning shift arrived 20 minutes later. He recognized me instantly, despite how I looked. He ran over, calling my name, just as Kendra came storming out to stop him. "Get away from that—" Her voice cut off as her face transformed from fury to fear the moment she heard him say, "Mr. Bryce." She stumbled backwards, trying to process what that name meant. Liam was already helping me sit up and dialing for an ambulance. Marcus appeared in the doorway and dropped his phone when he saw Liam kneeling beside me. They both stared like they were seeing a ghost. Reality hit them all at once. They had just assaulted the man who owned the entire hotel chain, the man whose name was on their paychecks, the man whose loyalty card they had snapped in half while laughing, and they'd done it all on camera. They made a last-ditch attempt to help me to my feet, but it was far too late. I wasn't going to forget this. I wasn't going to forgive them. I was going to end them. I stayed on the cold concrete what felt like forever, watching Liam argue with Kendra through the glass doors. Every breath sent pain radiating through my ribs, and the mop water had soaked through every layer of clothing. Liam kept gesturing toward me, while Kendra shook her head wildly, her hands slicing the air in frantic gestures as she tried to explain something. Marcus had vanished completely. The sound of ambulance sirens grew louder, cutting through the still morning. Liam rushed back out, took off his jacket, and slid it under my head. His hands trembled as he checked my pulse, whispering apologies I didn't need from him. Kendra burst back out the doors with her phone pressed tightly to her ear, pacing in tight circles, speaking rapidly. Her free hand kept yanking at her hair, and even from where I lay, I could see her eyes darting around the lobby, scanning for cameras. She was trying to figure out how much evidence of their abuse still existed. The ambulance paramedics arrived like a tidal wave of navy blue uniforms in urgent motion. They started asking questions. I tried to answer, struggling through the pain, while one of them checked my vitals. A frown appeared when they read my blood pressure, and an IV was started immediately. The female paramedic gently examined my ribs, and I couldn't hold back the sharp intake of breath when she found the broken ones. Liam stayed nearby, filling in what I couldn't say. He told them about finding me outside, the filthy water, who I was. When he said my name, both paramedics shared a quick glance before becoming noticeably more focused. As they prepped me for the stretcher, I spotted Marcus back in the lobby. His security uniform was disheveled, and he was now hunched over his phone, typing furiously. He kept wiping his hands down his pants, the same hands that yanked my hair and beaten me to the ground. Inside the ambulance, the paramedic asked about my medication. I explained about the oxycodone for my chronic back pain, gone now, poured into a storm drain by a cruel stranger. She made a note while stabilizing me for transport. The pain was getting worse without it, a slow burn spreading from my ribs through every inch of my body. The hospital intake was a blur of fluorescent lights and disinfectant. The triage nurse typed my information with practiced indifference until she saw my name. Her fingers paused over the keys. She looked at my ID, then at me, and back at the ID again. "Nolan Bryce?" she asked, carefully. "As in, Bryce Hotels?" I nodded, too drained to explain. Her face shifted instantly. "My husband works maintenance at the Bryce on Michigan Avenue. I've seen your photo in the break room." From that moment, her demeanor changed. She expedited everything. Within minutes, I was moved into a private room where a doctor began a full examination of my injuries. He was meticulous, ordering x-rays, documenting every bruise, every abrasion, every detail of what had been done to me.
3 broken ribs, the doctor confirmed. Clean breaks that would take weeks to heal properly. Somehow, my phone had survived the ordeal and buzzed with a call from my lawyer. I answered, kept my voice even despite the pain, and explained everything that had happened. He listened in silence, then immediately advised full documentation, photos, medical reports, witness statements. Even as we spoke, he was already making calls to mobilize his team. The doctor returned with more findings. Along with the broken ribs, there was extensive bruising along my back and sides. He photographed everything with precision, building the medical record I'd need later. When he asked about pain management, I hesitated. The memory of Kendra calling me a junkie while destroying my legitimate prescription was still fresh. "I'll manage without anything strong," I told him, even though my entire body was screaming in pain. He frowned, but documented my regular medication in the chart. "You'll need to contact your cardiologist," he said seriously. "Disrupting your medication schedule, especially heart meds, isn't something to take lightly." My assistant arrived not long after, carrying clean clothes and my laptop. Her face was pale with concern. She'd already discovered that the merger documents in my bag, torn apart by Marcus, had been the only signed originals. Weeks of negotiations, gone, shredded because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged. Nothing says welcome home like being mistaken for a vagrant in your own hotel and watching your prescription meds turn into storm-drained soup, I muttered. Through the hospital window, I could see the early sunlight stretching over the skyline. Somewhere across the city, Kendra and Marcus were probably still at the hotel, scrambling, trying to figure out their next move. My phone showed a list of missed calls from department heads. Word had gotten out. Something had happened. The first call I returned was to the head of HR. "Freeze Kendra and Marcus's employee files," I said, "but take no other action yet." There were procedures to follow, internal investigations, legal steps. But first, I needed to get out of this hospital and review that security footage. My assistant helped me change, careful of the bandages wrapped tight around my torso. Each movement burned, but at least I looked human again. The clothes I'd arrived in, ragged, soaked in dirty water, were now evidence. They went into a sealed bag with the rest of this morning's trauma. The doctor returned with discharge papers and a new prescription for pain medication. I wasn't sure I'd even fill it. He reminded me again to contact my cardiologist immediately. The interruption to my cardiac medication was already affecting my vitals. I had 48 hours to get back on schedule. Per hospital policy, my assistant had to wheel me out, despite my protests that I could walk. As we neared the exit, my phone buzzed with a message from Liam. He was still at the hotel, dealing with the arriving morning staff. People were asking questions. Kendra and Marcus were still there, still in yesterday's uniforms, trying to act like nothing had happened. But nothing about this morning could be made normal again. Nothing about what they'd done could be brushed away. They targeted me because I looked weak, because they thought I was beneath them. They had taken joy in humiliating me, in ripping up the last photo I had of my wife, in denying me the medication my body needed to survive. That cruelty hadn't come from a place of stress or confusion. It had come from choice. The hospital's parking garage felt alien after the sterile lights of the ER. My assistant had brought my car, but I asked her to drive. My hands were trembling, not from withdrawal, like Kendra had taunted, but from rage, from disbelief, from the crushing weight of what had just happened under my own roof. The merger documents could be recreated. The meetings I missed could be rescheduled. But first, I needed that footage. I needed to see it all, to make sure it was preserved before anyone could tamper with it. My phone rang again. "It's IT," my assistant said. "They're checking access permissions for the security archive." It was just after 7 a.m., too early for the full corporate IT team to be staffed. The footage from last night was locked behind layered protocols that required administrator-level approval. We drove through the slowly waking city while I made more calls. My lawyer was already at his office, assembling a legal team. "What Kendra and Marcus did," he said plainly, "wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Assault, theft, destruction of property. We're involving the police."
The evidence would be everything. Each bump in the road sent a sharp jolt through my ribs, and the lack of proper pain medication was starting to catch up with me. But worse than the physical pain was the memory of that torn photo, burned to ash, scattered across my face while they laughed. My wife's picture, the only one I ever carried, destroyed for their amusement. By the time we reached my office, the sun had fully risen. Somewhere in the city, Kendra was probably texting her cousin, the labor attorney she'd casually mentioned to a coworker last month. Marcus was likely scrambling through his social media, deleting those smug posts where he bragged about taking out the trash when dealing with homeless people near the hotel. This morning, they thought they were taking out trash. They thought they'd found an easy target, someone to humiliate without consequence. But they'd chosen the wrong man, and they'd shown their true selves, on camera, no less. My assistant helped ease me into my office chair, placing my laptop in front of me. There was so much to handle: filing police reports, retrieving surveillance footage, scheduling medical follow-ups. The ribs would heal, the merger documents could be redrafted. But the image of them laughing as they destroyed my wife's photo, that would never fade. They had shown me exactly who they were in the earliest hours of morning. Now it was my turn to show them who I was. Not with violence, not with cruelty. I wasn't like them. I would dismantle them with facts, with documentation. Every infraction, every policy violation, every law they had broken. The security footage would speak for itself. Their own actions would write their downfall. And maybe, just maybe, the system that allowed them to treat vulnerable people with such cruelty would finally be forced to change. My phone buzzed. Another message from Liam. Kendra and Marcus were spiraling, he said. They knew I had survived. They knew I was out of the hospital. They knew their time was running out. I adjusted myself in the chair, suppressing a groan as fresh pain radiated through my ribs. My assistant placed a glass of water at my desk, waiting quietly for instructions. I motioned toward the laptop, and she immediately opened the security system interface. Within the hour, a courier arrived with a cease and desist letter. Kendra's cousin had worked fast. The letter tried to recast her as the victim, claiming workplace harassment, demanding 2 years severance. The document accused me of creating a hostile environment by showing up in a way designed to entrap honest employees. My lawyer called as I read it. He'd already filed the police report and was coordinating with the prosecutor's office. He repeated what we both knew. The footage was crucial. Without it, the case could easily be twisted into a series of conflicting accounts. Finally, the IT department responded to our request. The head of security systems came to my office in person with laptop in hand. He connected to the hotel's network and navigated through several layers of authentication. I watched intently as he pulled up the feed from the lobby cameras. There it was, every moment, recorded in crystal clarity. I instructed him to transfer the footage to a secure server immediately, with redundant backups. He nodded, understanding without needing to ask why. Once I was alone, I opened the footage myself. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked play. There I was, stepping into the lobby at 2:47 a.m., barely able to stand. Kendra barely glanced at me before turning back to her screen. Her laughter when I asked for a room. Marcus approaching from the side. The shove. The way I stumbled. The way they laughed when I gasped. I had to pause the video when they found my wife's photo, even though I already knew what was coming. Watching Kendra tear it in half made my chest tighten. Then the lighter, the flame, the ashes drifting down while Marcus forced my head to watch. I forced myself to continue. The footage showed her pouring my prescription into the storm drain, the false 911 call, the destruction of the documents I'd spent weeks compiling, their mockery when they discovered my loyalty card, and finally the assault outside, the kicks, the mop water, the spit. All of it caught from multiple angles. My daughter's call interrupted the footage. She'd seen something online, posts about an incident at a Chicago hotel. A friend from school had forwarded her a link. I tried to downplay everything, told her I was fine, but she wasn't convinced. She said she was already packing her car and driving down from campus. I tried to dissuade her, but it was too late. The head of HR arrived shortly after, bringing the personnel files I'd requested. I reviewed Kendra and Marcus's records while she waited in silence. On the surface, both had glowing evaluations. Kendra had received multiple commendations for her efficiency in maintaining hotel standards. Marcus had been praised for keeping the property secure. But deeper in the files were red flags. Guest complaints, written warnings that had quietly disappeared, grievances filed and resolved without explanation. I asked HR for a complete review of all night shift incident reports from the past 3 years. The director's expression tightened, but she nodded and left to compile the information. A text buzzed from an unknown number.
It was a screenshot of a post Marcus had made in an online security forum. He was claiming that wealthy hotel owners were secretly dressing like homeless people to entrap honest employees. Other guards had already started chiming in with echoing the conspiracy theory with similar stories. It was gaining momentum. Then my cardiologist's office called. The medication disruption was serious, they said. I needed to come in immediately for an EKG and to refill my prescriptions. But first, they needed documentation, a police report showing the theft and destruction of my medication. The irony was unbearable. I needed official documentation that someone had destroyed my heart medication, someone who'd labeled me a junkie for needing it in the first place. The drive to the police station was painful. Every bump, every turn sent lightning through my ribs. The officer taking my statement watched the footage with increasing disbelief. He made copies of everything and assured me that charges would be filed: assault, theft of prescription drugs, both serious crimes. At the cardiologist's office, I sat through a stern lecture about the importance of medication adherence while nurses performed tests. The EKG showed irregularities, damage caused by the missed doses and the extreme stress of the assault. My doctor issued emergency refills and warned me plainly. The trauma and the medication lapse had strained my heart. I needed to make immediate lifestyle changes and reduce stress. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so absurd. Even the pharmacy visit carried its own quiet shame. The pharmacist asked to see the police report before filling the controlled substance prescription. I explained the situation. A woman nearby pulled her child closer, eyeing me with open suspicion. Another person assuming the worst. Back at the office, the HR review was ready. It revealed 23 documented incidents over the last 3 years where guests had been denied service during night shifts. The reasons were all sanitized: inappropriate appearance, potential security concerns, not meeting hotel standards. But the pattern was unmistakable. Kendra and Marcus had been systematically turning away anyone they decided didn't belong. I was still reviewing the files when my daughter arrived. She rushed into the office and froze when she saw me. Her expression crumpled. I tried to stand, but the pain forced me to sink back into the chair. She knelt beside me, careful not to touch my injured side, and in her worried face I saw my late wife. She stayed while I made more calls. The merger partners were starting to get nervous. The story had hit local news, though my name hadn't been mentioned. The headline read, "Luxury Hotel Security Practices Under Scrutiny After Alleged Assault." They wanted reassurances, wanted to know if this would jeopardize the deal. I told them the timeline would stay intact, but I wouldn't be dropping the criminal charges. My sister called from Miami, where she managed one of our flagship properties. She begged me to handle it quietly, for the sake of the 8,000 employees whose futures were tied to the merger. I promised to keep things moving, but I wouldn't pretend this didn't happen. I wouldn't bury it. We ended the call with her sighing in frustration, warning me again about my obsession with perfect justice. Meanwhile, the investigation kept deepening. One discovery hit hard. Tom had been written up 6 separate times by Kendra. The reason? Being too friendly with loiterers.
Each write-up had been meticulously locked, creating a clear paper trail. Tom's job had been hanging by a thread, just for showing human decency. He'd been one warning away from termination, not for misconduct, but for kindness. Then another letter arrived from Kendra's attorney. This time, they were requesting access to my medical records. It was obvious what they were looking for: any past history of mental health treatment or substance use that could be twisted to undermine my credibility. The strategy was transparent. Paint me as an unstable, vengeful billionaire waging war against hardworking blue-collar employees. As we continued reviewing the security footage, even more disturbing patterns emerged. Elderly guests turned away during storms. A woman with 2 children denied a room because her card had been declined, even though company policy allowed discretionary assistance. A man in a wheelchair told there were no accessible rooms, while the reservation system clearly showed vacancies. Every one of these incidents had been caught by the same cameras that recorded my assault. My lawyer urged patience. Let them believe they were still ahead. Let them feel secure.
Their arrogance will work in our favor, he said. But it was hard to be patient when my ribs throbbed with every breath, and the image of my wife's photo burning replayed endlessly in my mind. Then Kendra posted a video online, her volunteering at a food bank. The caption framed her as a selfless frontline worker under attack by corporate greed. Comments poured in, strangers praising her compassion, condemning hotel executives who didn't understand the realities of real work. She was building a false narrative, that of persecuted employee wronged by power. But the accounting department's audit uncovered something else. Kendra had been quietly altering overtime reports for 2 years. Always small amounts, careful not to trigger automatic red flags, but over time it had added up to thousands of dollars, a pattern of calculated theft. Now I had to make a choice, whether to expose the financial misconduct. My lawyer warned it would muddy the criminal case. He said juries don't like complicated victims. It's better to keep it clean, let the criminal charges stand alone. But not including it felt like letting her keep control of the story. Then I got word that Marcus's mother had suffered a mild heart attack. His family blamed me. They claimed the stress of my vendetta had triggered it. The news hit harder than I expected. Our mothers, mine and Marcus's, were now in the same cardiac ward, both of them suffering fallout from that single catastrophic night. The footage clearly showed the assault. The legal case was sound, but the human toll was rippling outward. I missed a key merger meeting while locked in depositions. Board members started texting, subtly questioning where my priorities lay. The deal, they said, was vital. It would secure jobs, stabilize the brand. But it was now at risk because of my pursuit of justice for that one traumatic night. And every time I considered letting it go, I remembered the other 23, guests who had been turned away, people who didn't have my resources, people who'd quietly disappeared into the night without recourse. 3 of our corporate sponsors requested urgent meetings about brand alignment. The story had gone national. Hospitality trade forums were debating the issue. Some praised firm security. Others called it systemic discrimination. Our stock price began to waver. Then during an inspection of one of the other Bryce hotels, the panic hit. The moment I stepped into the lobby, marble floors, polished desk, security uniform, I froze. My chest clenched. I couldn't breathe. The memory slammed into me like a wave. I couldn't go any farther. My assistant finished the inspection while I sat in the car, focused on breathing exercises, trying not to fall apart. After that, I started sleeping in my office. I avoided hotels altogether. The space filled with takeout containers and stacks of documents as I reviewed hour after hour of security footage, each one showing moments of cruelty, patterns of judgment, abuse passed off as policy. It wore me down. Every clip added weight to my chest. Then my brother flew in from Seattle. He found me at 3 a.m., hunched over my desk, surrounded by legal folders and printed medical records. His voice was quiet but firm. "You're spiraling. Just like after Anna died. This isn't what she would have wanted." He was right about one thing. It was consuming me. But he was wrong about what I wanted. This wasn't about perfect justice. This was about the unchecked cruelty that had flourished under my watch, about a culture that decided who deserved dignity and who didn't, about the policies I had approved, the ones that gave Kendra and Marcus the space to become what they were. I wasn't just cleaning up after them. I was confronting my own failure. That's when Tom's wife called my assistant.
Their car tires had been slashed, what police labeled as random vandalism. Tom's wife was shaken. She said she was taking the kids to stay with her mother. "I can't raise them in this kind of fear," she told my assistant. When I offered to relocate their entire family at my expense, she replied coldly, "Your money can't fix what your vengeance broke." The guilt settled deep in my chest, but I kept building the case. 47 documented incidents across 3 years. 47 people denied basic dignity. Each one a human being dismissed, diminished, discarded. And each one a failure of the system I had created. The evidence was overwhelming. But would a jury see it that way? Would they see the truth, or just a wealthy man trying to punish everyday workers for making a mistake? My daughter voiced it first. She had taken a semester off college to be with me, but now even her voice was lined with uncertainty. "What if the jury sympathizes with Kendra and Marcus?" she asked. "What if they think you're just angry because your pride got hurt?" She wasn't wrong to ask, and I didn't have a good answer. To counter Kendra's growing narrative, I made a difficult choice. I released my full medical records, everything. My cardiac condition, the prescriptions for chronic pain, the grief counseling sessions after my wife's death. Every vulnerability laid bare so they couldn't weaponize them against me, so they couldn't twist the truth. It felt invasive, humiliating, like being stripped in public, but it was necessary. Then came the discovery that hit the hardest, buried in my own inbox. 2 years ago, an employee had flagged concerns about the night staff turning away guests unfairly. I had forwarded it to HR with the dismissive note. "Sounds like a personality conflict. Resolve at department level." No investigation, no follow-up. I had silenced the warning, and in doing so, I had helped lay the groundwork for what happened to me. The judge set the trial date for 8 months out. My attorney had requested a fast-tracked hearing, but the court was already booked solid. "Justice delayed isn't justice denied," he said. But 8 months felt like a lifetime. 8 months for Kendra to grow her martyr image. 8 months for public sentiment to drift. 8 months of reliving that night over and over. That same night, I learned through her lawyer that Kendra had already spent $30,000 in legal fees. Her savings were vanishing. She truly believed she'd been protecting the brand, keeping the hotel safe from people she'd decided were threats. In her mind, she wasn't an abuser. She was the one under attack by a vindictive billionaire who had set a trap. Then, a breakthrough. A former employee reached out through my legal team. They had quit after being ordered to deny service to an elderly man in a wheelchair. They were willing to testify about the discrimination they had seen firsthand. Their courage inspired others. Soon, more former employees came forward, each one with another layer to the pattern. Then came the restraining order hearing. It should have been a victory, and on paper it was. The judge ruled in my favor. The video footage was irrefutable. But watching Marcus learn he could no longer visit his mother in the cardiac ward, where my own mother was also recovering, hit me in a way I didn't expect. Both of our mothers in the same ward, both suffering because of the consequences we'd set in motion. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like ruin. Then came more complications. The prosecutor warned us that Kendra's defamation countersuit was gaining traction in the court of public opinion. Her spotless record, her food bank volunteer work, her claims of being victimized by a billionaire's vendetta. It was resonating with people. The footage was clear, yes, but juries weren't always ruled by clarity, especially when class and sympathy collided. So I made another hard call. We'd keep the evidence of overtime fraud sealed until after the criminal trial. It felt like a compromise of my values, but my lawyer was firm. "Don't complicate the story," he said. "Let their cruelty speak for itself." In the background, the business trembled. The hotel chain stock dropped 8%. Institutional investors raised concerns about leadership stability. One board member called it a luxury brand in chaos. A second asked if I planned to step back from day-to-day operations. Imagine that, 8% down because the CEO got beaten in his own lobby. Karma's expensive when you ignore red flags labeled personality conflicts. The board called emergency meetings. The merger partners demanded written explanations and revised impact reports. Everything I had spent decades building was beginning to shake. Not just because I had been attacked, but because I had created a system where that kind of attack could happen. Because I'd looked vulnerable, and someone thought that meant I didn't deserve dignity. But the deeper truth hurt worst. I had built the system. I'd signed the policies. I'd empowered the people who interpreted them in the worst possible ways. The assault wasn't an isolated horror. It was the visible symptom of a deeper disease, one I had nurtured, with silence, inattention, and misplaced trust.
The complicity of my executive team became undeniable during the depositions. They had known. They'd been aware of issues on the night shifts, but they hadn't escalated them. They had read the complaints, categorized them as low priority, and moved on. They'd let Kendra and Marcus operate unchecked, not out of malice, but because the hotel ran efficiently, because the numbers looked good, because ignoring the human cost was easier than confronting it. The realization hit harder than any of Marcus's kicks. I hadn't just been assaulted, I had built the very system that made it possible. Every policy I had signed, every performance metric we'd tracked, every glowing review for efficiency had fostered a culture where cruelty could thrive, as long as it was polished, where compliance meant protection, and compassion meant risk, where people like me were shielded by the brand and everyone else was dispensable. I issued immediate changes across the chain. No guest could be refused without executive approval. All shift activities had to be recorded. Random audits would be conducted on night shift decisions. But I knew policies couldn't change hearts. They couldn't undo years of quiet harm. They couldn't restore the dignity of those already turned away. I reached out to a city councilman for support. He listened politely, but declined to help. A billionaire being assaulted in his own hotel didn't generate enough political sympathy. He gave me contacts for victim advocacy groups, but warned they might not be interested either. I understood. My wealth made me a complicated victim, even though the bruises were real. The investigation deepened. Technical analysis of Marcus's phone data revealed inconsistencies in his story. Messages sent during the hours he claimed he wasn't using his phone contradicted his entire timeline. His defense of self-preservation fell apart. But Kendra's narrative held steadier. She believed she had been protecting the hotel, protecting the brand. She saw herself as a loyal employee caught in the crosshairs of an executive's personal spiral. As the case wore on, we both deteriorated. My cardiac monitor flagged worsening stress responses. Kendra's hands developed a tremor. We were destroying each other in pursuit of justice, our versions of it. The footage showed clear assault. The law was on my side. But the wreckage extended far beyond the moment I hit the floor. The pattern was undeniable. The evidence was comprehensive. But justice still felt fragile. Everything now depended on whether 12 strangers could see through class and social framing, whether they could separate the man from the title, the victim from the wealth, whether they could decide if dignity was a right or a privilege, whether assault was still assault when the victim looked like someone used to power. It all came down to whether cruelty, once learned, could be unlearned, whether the system I had built, however unintentionally, could be rebuilt. Late one night, while reviewing old executive meeting minutes, I found what I'd feared: quarterly reports summarizing concerns about night shift guest experiences. The language was corporate, vague, service irregularities, pattern deviations, but the meaning was clear. They had known. For years, systemic discrimination had been happening in our lobbies under the cover of vague language and silent complicity. They hadn't investigated. They hadn't questioned it. They filed it away. This wasn't about two rogue employees. This was an entire framework of willful blindness. Executives who ignored patterns, managers who rewarded output without conscience, a brand that valued reputation more than responsibility. I sat at my desk, my hands moving automatically drafting sweeping policy reforms, executive approval for all guest rejections, mandated recordings, random compliance audits. But even as I typed, I knew these were dressings, bandages on a deep, festering wound I'd let grow. Then another former night auditor came forward. She'd quit after being told to turn away an elderly man in a wheelchair during a storm. Her testimony stretched the pattern even further. More followed, one after another, all with the same story. They'd been ordered to deny help to the vulnerable, and when they objected, they'd been punished or driven out. I sat in my home office, unable to enter a hotel without a sedative, and I accepted what that meant. I had created this. Every incentive that prioritized appearances over people. Every policy that gave unchecked power to untrained judgment. Every complaint I'd dismissed as noise, it had all pointed here. Reform wasn't a choice. It was an obligation. Whether I won in tort or not didn't matter anymore. I would rebuild the culture of my company from the ground up.
It wasn't just policies, it was the very values we chose to measure and reward. The merger would still move forward, but with new safeguards for both employees and guests woven into the agreement. My IT team's forensic analysis of Marcus's phone unearthed critical metadata. Several texts he'd sent during his shift directly contradicted the timeline he'd testified to. One message to his wife, time-stamped while he claimed to be defending himself, read simply, "Taking out trash." That single line and its timing unraveled his entire narrative. I presented the findings to the prosecutor without bitterness. The focus wasn't revenge. It was the pattern, the system, and the system had failed. Kendra's own logs became her undoing. Dozens of entries about undesirable individuals she'd proudly removed from the property. Her obsessively detailed notes, once seen as signs of diligence, now served as evidence of bias, of targeted exclusion. As more evidence emerged, the prosecutor's strategy shifted. This wasn't just an assault case anymore. It was being tried as a hate crime, an act motivated by economic discrimination. The enhanced charges brought heavier penalties, yes, but more importantly, they acknowledged the systemic cruelty behind the violence. Once I guaranteed protection from retaliation, more employees came forward. Their stories painted a bleak portrait of the hotel's night culture, one where cruelty wasn't just tolerated, but encouraged. Some had participated out of fear, others had resigned rather than play along. All had been shaped by the same machinery I'd built and let run unchecked. Outside the courthouse, media interest surged. News vans lined the streets, cameras aimed at the courthouse steps, waiting for glimpses of the billionaire plaintiff and the working-class defendants. The optics were stark: wealth versus poverty, power versus those who'd never had it. The courtroom reflected the tension. On one side of the gallery, maintenance and day staff sat quietly behind me. On the other, night security employees filled the rows behind Kendra and Marcus. The hotel chain, once a single unit, was now split, a mirror of a deeper fracture in its culture. Both defendants bore the physical weight of the trial. Kendra's hands now trembled so badly she required medication. Marcus had lost significant weight, his uniform hanging off his frame. I wasn't much better. My cardiac monitor beeped rhythmically in my pocket, an unwanted metronome for every moment of testimony. The prosecutor began with the footage, clean, high-definition clips from multiple angles. The jurors flinched when they saw my wife's photo being torn and set on fire. Several looked away when my prescription pills were poured down the storm drain. The violence, the kicks, the mocking laughter, the mop water, the spit left nothing to interpretation. This wasn't security. This wasn't policy enforcement. This was cruelty for entertainment. Tom's testimony was pivotal. Despite the risk to his position, he took the stand and described Kendra's termination list, 3 strike tallies of employees she considered too sympathetic to guests. His own name had been listed for simply showing kindness to people she didn't think deserved it. His pastor sat in the gallery nodding in quiet solidarity as Tom described the fear, the manipulation, and the slow erosion of compassion on the night crew. The judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation for Kendra after a sudden outburst in court. During Tom's testimony, she leapt up and shouted about protecting society from parasites. Bailiffs restrained her while she continued to rant about who did and didn't deserve five-star service. Her attorney's expression said everything. They knew it was over. Then came the audio enhancement. Previously inaudible lines in the security footage were now clear. Marcus's voice, low, angry, while kicking me. "Stay down where you belong." Those 6 words shattered any remaining ambiguity. The prosecutor played it 3 times, letting each juror hear the contempt, the class hatred, the intent. The case was no longer about a single night. It had become a referendum on the structure I had built. Because the footage didn't just show the attack, it revealed our blind spots, our absence of oversight, our failure to monitor repeated guest rejections. Our neglect had become part of the record. Kendra's breakdown on the stand was raw, unfiltered. She admitted the rush she felt when rejecting people, the power she experienced for the first time in her life. Her words were chilling. How it thrilled her to uphold standards. How humiliation became part of the job. It was never just about policies. It was about what those policies gave people permission to become. When asked to deliver a victim impact statement, I faltered. My ribs had healed, my bruises faded, but I still couldn't walk into a hotel lobby without anxiety medication. I still couldn't sleep without hearing her laughter, without seeing the photo burn, without feeling the shame of being seen as disposable in a place I owned.
The image of my wife's photo burning haunted my sleep. But what weighed on me even more was the knowledge that this hadn't just happened to me. It had happened to others, people who couldn't fight back, who hadn't had the platform or resources to be heard. So I made a decision that caught the prosecutor off guard. Instead of pushing for maximum sentences, I asked the court to impose mandatory empathy training and community service. Prison wouldn't teach them to see the humanity in those they'd discarded, but maybe serving the very people they once deemed worthless could. The irony wasn't lost on me. Needing anxiety medication just to enter my own hotels, like being allergic to your own food. Technically possible, but a nightmare when you're expected to host business dinners. Still, I hoped working in homeless shelters might start to teach them something real. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all assault charges. They recommended minimum sentences, noting the lack of criminal history, but the evidence had been too clear to ignore. The jury foreman later admitted to reporters that the class dynamics had made the verdict difficult, but they couldn't deny what they'd seen with their own eyes. The trial left a permanent fault line within the company. Some employees were ashamed they hadn't spoken up sooner. Others still defended Kendra, insisting she was just protecting the brand. The divide reflected a deeper reckoning. What does hospitality actually mean? And who is deserving of it? Immediately after the verdict, I rolled out reforms across the entire chain. Every hotel now required annual training focused on dignity, equity, and respect. Night shifts would operate under increased oversight. A newly formed guest advocacy department would review all guest refusals. These changes came too late for those already harmed, but not, I hoped, for those yet to walk through our doors. My own condition didn't improve. I could no longer enter hotel lobbies without anxiety medication. I continued to run the company remotely from my home office, leading virtual inspections, conducting meetings through screens. Still, the merger went through, now with contractual protections for workers and guests. The deal closed successfully, preserving jobs and reshaping a culture. Kendra served weekends in jail while completing her community service hours at a local homeless shelter. The same people she once had security escort out were now the people she handed food trays to. Early reports said she struggled at first, resistant and uncomfortable. But over time, something shifted. She started seeing them as people, not intrusions. Marcus lost his security license after the conviction. He eventually found work in construction, where his strength was used to build instead of intimidate. His mother recovered from her heart scare, but their relationship never fully healed.
He learned what it meant to face consequences, even when you believe you're the one keeping order. Tom, meanwhile, was promoted to head our new guest advocacy division. The compassion that had once marked him for dismissal became the standard we now held everyone to. He created training programs based on his own experiences, teaching staff how to treat every guest with the dignity they deserve, no matter what they looked like, where they came from, or how they arrived. On the anniversary of my wife's death, my daughter and I visited her grave. I told her what she had always tried to teach me, that systems could dehumanize just as easily as people could, that leadership wasn't about control or brand, it was about protecting those without power. My daughter held my hand as I admitted how late the change had come. The photo of my wife, the one they burned, is still in my wallet, taped back together, its seams visible, its edges uneven. Never whole again, but I kept it that way on purpose. A reminder that cruelty is learned, but kindness must be taught. That every policy, every performance metric, change didn't come from statements or apologies. It came through action, through policies with real consequences, through accountability that extended from graveyard shifts all the way up to the boardroom, through finally recognizing that true hospitality meant serving everyone with dignity, not just those who looked like they fit in. The story didn't end with perfect justice. It ended with imperfect progress, with the hard truth that systems can be changed, even if the pain they caused can't be undone, with the realization that cruelty thrives in cultures of apathy, but it doesn't survive where compassion is made non-negotiable, and with the undeniable proof that even people who've been broken can help build something better. Thanks for watching the video. I still wonder sometimes, did the owner ever stop needing medication just to walk into one of his own hotels? That photo of his wife, still torn and taped together in his wallet, it says everything. Some things you can fix, some you just carry, the best way you know how. See you in the next vid.